Hey everybody, hope you're doing well. Thank you again for joining us for our monthly Flagstar Flex series. Whether you're seeing this live or after the fact as a recording, we always appreciate you taking the time to spend some time with us again on this Flex program. I think we're probably 27 or 28 episodes in and continuing to just try to bring value add to you as our business partners, whether it be all through a wide variety of content, right? Whether it be mortgage specific, non-mortgage specific, marketing, you name it. We've tried to tackle a lot of different topics and sessions, all with the hope of hopefully you walk away with one or two things that you can implement and make your process and what you do better. And I'm really excited about today's session. But before I go into that, again, as always, hope you're doing well, safe, healthy. Obviously, there's a lot going on in the world today. So with that being said, hoping that all you, your loved ones, family members are doing well, safe, and healthy. As in regards to today's session, look, I think I've been in Vegas twice in the last 10 days for the NAM conference and then the AIM Fuse conference. And I was really excited about getting introduced to our guest today, because I think this is a moment or a pause for us, right, in regards to what we're going to talk about today in relation to what we're facing and feeling, right, with the challenges that we're going through in this industry. For a lot of us, this is the toughest time. I mean, I know I've been doing this for 24, 25 years. Some people have been doing it a lot longer than that and a lot less than that. And we've seen, just some things that have taken place over the last 18 months that are really impacting us, both professionally and personally, your mindset, your mentality. So I get introduced to our guest speaker today by one of our AEs. And I got a chance to speak with her. She obviously agreed to do the session today, so we're really thankful for that. And then I went and kind of looked at some of her work. So really excited, because I think it's extremely timely, especially with a lot of the feedback that we're hearing. And I'll just start by giving you a little bit of intro on who she is, and then we'll bring her on board. So she is a mindset and executive coach. She's the author of the High Achievers Guide. She helps successful, unsatisfied people through empowering change, through deep examination of the conditioning, to identify what I would call limiting patterns that keep them kind of stuck in a rut or in a cycle of causing or chasing achievement that is chronically unfulfilling, right? And I think a lot of that goes into our day-to-day, right? If you know me at all, and certainly my sales force and my managers know me, I say this all the time: attitude and effort, right? Those are two things that people can't take away from you. But man, we're always going to have a bad day. At some point, somehow, some way, something's going to get to you, right? And she has built an expertise around, okay, how do you face that head on? How do you take that challenge, and how do you move forward, right? She's also the host of a podcast, Musings of High Achiever. So with all that being said, with that introduction, I'd love to bring Maki Moussavi to the stage. Hey, Maki, how you doing?
Good, John. Thanks for having me today.
So most people probably don't know this about you, but we were just joking around. So I know you're in Kansas City, and we were talking about has the Kelsey Swift collaboration, the Swifties, have they taken over Kansas City yet?
I don't know if they've physically taken over Kansas City, but we certainly hear a lot about the Taylor Swift, Travis Kelce duo these days.
Well, as rumor has it, supposedly she's supposed to be at the game again tonight, so I'm sure it'll be a madhouse.
Sure, it'll be super exciting, just like the last couple times.
Well, hey, I certainly appreciate you jumping on today. And as you and I were talking kind of leading up to this, I think it's perfect timing, right? And just to kind of set the stage, and then we'll go into a couple of the things that I think we want to talk about. Mm-hmm. Look, we know it, right? This is probably some of the toughest times we've seen as originators in our space in a very long time. We all know the story, right? Rates went from 3%. We're up over 7.5% today, probably pushing to 8%. There's a lack of inventory. Every time you turn around, some other economic piece of data throws another challenge at us. So there's no doubt for many people that see this, and so many of us in the industry, it's the toughest times we've ever seen, right? And there are some LOs that have only been doing it for the last 5, 6, 7 years, and they've only seen these great times, right? They haven't seen the cycle where a lot of us have seen the ups and downs or the ebbs and flows. So I
Mhm.
think this is perfect timing, right? So let's kind of get into it. I know one of the things we talked about was just kind of the challenges of riding, what you call like an emotional roller coaster that comes with the ups and downs or the ebbs and flows of the business. So
Right.
what kind of thoughts have you seen, or what have you seen on a topic such as that?
Yeah. So, first of all, I'm married to somebody who's in the mortgage industry, so I probably have a little bit of insight beyond, the average insight. And I've actually done quite a bit of work with real estate agents as well. So I understand the ebbs and the flows of the business. And I think one of the things that comes up really often that is it's super important to look at. So if you have been in the business for a while versus if you have not, there's kind of two different perspectives there, right? So one of them is that the nature of this business is cyclical, right? And for a lot of you who've been in it for a really long time, you understand there's times of the year where it's going to pick up and get busy and there's going to be a lot of activity. And then there's times of the year that it's going to slow down and become quiet like it does usually towards the end of the year, like we're entering right now. And then, of course, there's this additional stress of like interest rates and the other things that are going on that are like extenuating circumstances beyond the norm. So there's that group of people. Then for those who have been kind of thriving and they entered the market when it was really booming and doing really well, and all they've ever known is more of the feast rather than the famine, it can be really scary and stir up a lot of anxiety because it's not predictable. What's going to happen next is not predictable. And that is where finding a place where you can have a certain level of detachment and neutrality from what is happening outside of you and around you and in the industry is very, very, very important. It's also not something that we're taught to do. And you do need to put some effort in to get to the point where you can actually do that for yourself and be in a more balanced place and not necessarily going up and down and riding really high and then crashing down really low and then staying and spinning in like anxiety and worry for that, however long that period's going to last.
Yeah. So when you talk about that, kind of like finding that calm and detachment, I think for a lot of people that's easy to say, right?
Mhm.
Like not
Absolutely.
from your perspective. I think
Yeah.
like for somebody like me, I look at that and I talk to LOs and I talk to owners of companies,
Mhm.
and to being able to detach themselves becomes almost impossible, right? So
Yeah.
what have you coached people on, or what have you seen? Like, what are some ways to do that when
Mhm.
intrinsically, like for example, the owner of a company may not have that, they haven't been, or maybe I should say it a different way, they've been programmed over many years to not think that way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we need to talk about that first, right? So you mentioned, I focus on conditioning, and one of the pieces of there's multiple different avenues that our conditioning around what it looks like to be successful comes from. So even before you entered the industry, there was something that drove you to it. I'm going to go in there, I'm going to crush it, I'm going to make a lot of money, I'm going to close a lot of deals. And then when you get into the industry, you have this additional layer of reinforcement of that, right? Because from an industry perspective, there are certain expectations, measurements, and things that come with what does a successful person in this industry look like, right? So you have all these layers. And what happens is you also are spending time with people who are in the same space as you, whether it's at work or just, through your conversations. And so if somebody starts to panic. I always think of this really funny Kings of Comedy. Yeah, I'm really old, but Cedric the Entertainer has this little bit where he talks about like how if one person starts running, everybody starts running, even if they don't really know why, because it's just like a fear response.
Right.
And in this, it's kind of the same. If you're spending a lot of time with people who are starting to feel panicked and they're talking about that and it's producing a lot of anxiety and worry, maybe even if you weren't feeling that way initially, that kind of emotional state is catching. And then you start to think, well, it's normal to feel this way because everybody around me is feeling this way. And before you know it, you're not really conscious of the fact that there's all this conditioning around, oh no, terrible things are happening. And also, this is not what it looks like when we're in the successful or like producing phase of our business. And so then you just get sucked into this very scary place. And the most important thing that you can do for yourself first is to be conscious of what's happening with you emotionally, right? Because we're all talking about emotional states here. The worry, the fear, the anxiety. Take a pause. And instead of trying to push those feelings away and start getting really active in activity or doing so that you can avoid that, it's actually really important to pause and be like, okay, what am I worried about exactly? And be very aware, tune into what you're telling yourself, to what you're hearing, what's being triggered, so that you can look at it and fact check yourself. And this is where I think for people who are more experienced and have been through a lot of the cycles of ups and downs, you're doing this every single year, right? Or you're doing this every single season. And you know better because you've been through, you know that there's a natural cycle that's taking place. And so if you can just take a pause and say, I've been through this before. What's it looked like before? Do I spin in the same way? When does it start to improve? How am I not making good use of my time during those slow times? And how can I shift that? You need to get conscious and be curious and ask yourself some questions and start to see, this is what triggers my anxiety. This is what I start to say to myself. This is where I go off the rails. I need to be very diligent about making sure that the things that I'm saying to myself or what I'm worrying about is actually a thing to be worried about, first of all. That's the first step that I suggest.
Yeah, that's interesting, right? Because I think, as you were talking about I was thinking about like the sphere of influence, right? If you want to call it that, right? So I'm an LO. I work at a company. I'm the owner of a company. I have LOs. Everybody has this mindset of it's slower than it was before, right? There's less volume out there. There's less people buying homes. There's no refinance activity taking place. And then keep going down the line, right? Now I start talking to my referral sources, which in this environment, with it being 80 to 85% purchase business, is probably going to be, in a lot of cases, a real estate agent.
Mm-hmm.
The real estate agents are feeling the same pressure because, again, less inventory. So they're writing less contracts. So they're doing less business. Title companies, attorneys who are involved in the closing. So as you go down that, I just kept thinking about this whole sphere of influence, right? And if everybody's saying the same thing or feeling the same way, and I say everybody with quotes around it, but people that you're coming in contact with are feeling the same way, you're going to be impacted by that at some point, right?
You absolutely are. It's just human nature. And that's why it's so important to see, if I'm feeling fine and I'm kind of focused on what I need to do that's within my control right now, and then I start talking to people or I'm starting to get text message or we're having conversations and it's that fear and anxiety and the reinforcement, like this is really bad and what are we going to do? If you are not really conscious and protective of where your mind is at in those moments, you can easily get pulled down into that spiral, especially because, it's not like, I'm not suggesting that you should be unrealistic and not look at what's really happening, right? You absolutely should.
Sure.
But there is also, even what we're in right now with the rising interest rates and things like that, it eventually it's going to end, right? And it's going to start going back in the other direction. That's just the nature of how things work.
That's right.
And so it's really important to look at, how much energy am I expending in this really negative state and place and letting it kind of seep in from other sources when I know that none of this is actually helping me with what's happening right now or how to plan for what comes next, because I do have the time right now to think about that rather than having a ton of conversations about how terrible it is. Like, how can I redirect that time and investment of energy into something else?
That's right. And it's interesting. It's so funny because you said that, like, last week at the conference in Vegas, one of the presenters was Doug Duncan, who's the chief economist for Fannie. And he got the room laughing because he started with something really simple. He's like, look, I'm here to tell you, rates go up. And as much as they go up, at some point they go down.
That's right.
He's like, I think we've lost sight of this. This is nothing new. The only difference was the acceleration of how fast it happened and where the starting point was, where it was coming from, right? But to your point, and I'd love to get your kind of take on this, right? Because I think when you talk about the mentality and the mindset, and I think that's where facts versus fiction come into play too, right? The more knowledgeable you are, again, I say this all the time, the national media likes to sensationalize everything. And almost like a weather person, they get paid to be wrong 95% of the time, right? Like, it's unbelievable to me. But I think that's where, like, when you dive into the facts and become the subject matter expert of your marketplace, and then the industry that you participate in, obviously the mortgage industry, the better you are at educating other people. That's not as bad as you think it is. Because guess
Right.
what? It's really not as bad as we think it is, or that the perception
Mhm.
is. Does that make sense?
It absolutely makes sense. And you're right. I mean, there is, yeah, everybody likes a good train wreck to watch, right? And so we do get a lot of amplification of doomsday scenarios when it comes to things like this. Everyone's talking about inflation and interest rates and, all the things. And we're living in some very interesting times. You alluded to that. There's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot that's going on that feels, it makes us uneasy. And so I'll just interject, you know, it's okay if you occasionally get off track and what's happening in the world gets to you. Like, you're just human, right? That's okay. It's all right. It's okay to acknowledge the reality and know you can't shut those things out while you're also dealing with these other worries. But it is the case that, when it comes to the mindset, and I'll take a little bit of a deeper dive here for just a moment to kind of give you some additional context. We often talk about the ego and the role of the ego and the way that we operate in our lives. And people will say things like, well, it's best if you just destroy your ego because it's the cause of so many problems, which I don't agree with. The ego is actually a necessary part of how we operate. But the challenge becomes that our conditioning really shows itself through the way that our ego interacts with us inside of our own minds. So what I mean by that is, even if you have 25 years of experience and you've literally been through this cycle every single year or every 2 years or however often the ups and downs take place, and that's the factual reality, right? The fear-based part of your mind, which is your ego, wants to keep you safe. And so it just starts sounding the alarm. This is scary. This is bad. This is wrong. You're going to end up under a bridge. And it just has so much to say because the intention of that part of your mind is to make you do something to keep yourself safe, right? And so factually, that's your opportunity to check that and say, this too shall pass. It always does. There's never been a time when it has not. And so I'm not going to go into that fear and scarcity place that I've been in for so long that I'm surrounded by. I'm going to look at it and be objective and say, you know what, just like this guy said, interest rates go up, interest rates go down. And the more neutral you can be in that response to yourself. And I really do encourage that when that part of your mind pipes up with something, that you respond to it, the more you will be able to bring yourself back to this less frantic place and less frantic feeling. And, you can also play that role when you're talking to other people who are in that space, because that will also help you. If somebody comes to you and says like, oh, I'm freaking out, it's like all these terrible things, you have the opportunity to say to that person, hey, we've all been here before. Rates go up, rates go down. Sometimes it slows down, then it picks back up. And so that's just where we're at right now. And you can play a role in being that person as well.
Sorry for coughing there. I'm a little under the weather as we're doing this, so I'm trying to mute it as I go.
No problem.
Hey, so talk about that sense of empowerment or the calm empowerment. Like, how do you get there? How does that influence somebody? Like, what would be some of the ways you could look at doing that when things are uncertain, right? We've talked about all the uncertainty. When things are like that, how do you condition yourself to do that?
Yeah. So, I do think there's this additional challenge when you're in this industry that's very focused on production and numbers and quantitative results and things of that nature. So when you're in a place where you're feeling really stressed out about what's happening, the only thing you can do is practice persistence around the things that I'm talking about. So you can't just once or twice be like, I'm going to fact check myself and then I'm going to do a bit of a resetting of my expectations. You have to do it consistently. And I really encourage the use of pattern interruptions. So if you have very consistent thoughts, like, let's say one of them might be something like, well, I just don't know where my next deal or client's going to come from. What I would challenge you to do, because this came up a lot with my real estate clients, is when do you ever really know where your next client or deal is going to come from? Like, most of you have no idea. They show up through referral or through a lead of some kind. It just comes out of left field, right? That's usually the case. So why is it different all of a sudden? You usually have no idea where that's coming from anyway. So if you can remind yourself, instead of thinking like, well, I don't know where my next client's going to come from, you can flip that narrative to like, it'll be cool to see where my next client comes from and neutralize it, right? Because you never really know. You're doing the work and you have the foundation so people know you and they come to you for that and you've done a good job or whatever. But you aren't sitting there predicting like this is the next person that's going to come through and it's going to come from this. You never have that information. So that's what I mean by fact checking and then resetting the way that you're talking about that thing. Instead of being like, well, I don't know where it's going to come from, remind yourself you never know where it's going to come from. And so turn it into something much more neutral, like it'll be cool to see where the next one comes from. And then go about your business and focus on something that you can focus on right now. That is maybe about, well, what am I going to do when the market starts picking up? How do I want to capitalize on that? Prepare for something that you know is going to happen, even if you don't know when, because it gives you a good place to kind of put your effort and energy into.
It's funny, when you said that, you reminded me when I first started in the industry, the company I worked for, we would have sales meetings in person every Monday morning. And then we would do like a phone blitz for like 2 hours, just trying to book appointments for the next 2 weeks, right? And one thing we did is we turned it around from the negative. We stopped tracking on the board how many appointments you got. Mm-hmm. We actually started tracking how many times people said no to you. Just a different spin, right? Because you knew if you made 100 phone calls, you were going to get some no's eventually, right? And then it became a challenge of like, how long can I keep them on the phone, right? So
right.
It's funny you mention that because it's just a slight change in your mental perception of what you're doing.
It's very slight. And so back to your question about, how do you do this work? It can feel a little bit exhausting at first because you're not used to being consciously aware of what's going on in your head. And then when you are, you're like, oh my God, it's a freaking mess in there. Like, how am I ever going to clean this up? But the reality is that you can. And the way that you do is by being very persistent in paying attention to what's happening in your mind, interrupting that pattern, fact checking yourself. And the more you do that, then what happens is your mind is so much like being physically conditioned for something. Like you would never just get off the couch and run a marathon without preparing for it. Your mindset and the way that you think and operate is not going to change overnight. But if you just do this practice of paying attention, flipping it, being deliberately detached in a healthy way, and neutralizing your thoughts and replacing them with something more supportive, it becomes second nature eventually. You just have to persist and let that muscle memory and that resiliency around thinking and operating in that different way catch up to you. And so I really recommend, if you have a person in your industry that is close to you, that's like maybe your business buddy or whatever, and you guys talk frequently, buddy up and do it for one another. And be in that place where like one person can remind the other, no, let's reframe it. Let's just do a simple reframe and let's think about it that way. And when you've got someone to kind of bounce that off of, it's even more powerful.
Wow. Yeah. It's interesting that you have like that mentor that you're talking about, right? Maybe somebody that you lean on in the industry. That's interesting. I'd say one of the things that we talked about was kind of, and I think it holds true so much in this industry, right? Especially when you're talking more about the people that have been doing it or in the camp that have been doing it for a very long time.
Yep.
The belief system, right? And what I think you described at one point is like to identify and shift what is an outdated belief system that impacts your patterns of thought, your behavior. Can we dive into that a little bit? Because I think that's key right now.
It really is. And it's so important. So this is going to be one of those things where you'll really have to remember this, because once again, what you're surrounded by and the measure of success in the industry is what it is, and it's consistently being fed to you. You know very well what the measure of success is from an industry standard. You work with people who, probably embody that to some extent. You probably see people who embody that being celebrated by your company or organization at these conferences and things that you go to, right? Just because that is the measure of success and mode or model of success that you're being shown doesn't mean that it's what works for you. Okay. So it's really important, if there are pressures, stressors, things that feel misaligned to you in that model of what everyone else is saying is this is what success looks like in this industry that don't work for you, it's time to change that to what is going to work for you. You do not need to operate under the model of success as it's been determined by someone else. And that requires courage. right? And that requires a lot of resiliency around what we've talked about, because even if you decide success looks different for me, the way that your industry sees it is not going to change. And so you have to be so firm in that belief and that conviction and that alignment with what success looks like for you, that you are not going to veer off and get shoved off that path over and over and over again when you see examples that are more about the industry model. So everyone gets to decide in this industry. I mean, I think that's one of the reasons it's attractive to people, right? The mortgage industry, the real estate industry, like this is essentially your own business. And so you get to decide what good production looks like, what the rest of your life looks like. You know, if you're so focused on your professional output to the exclusion of everything, whether it's taking decent care of yourself, eating, you know, spending time with your loved ones, just basic things that come with life, but you're really over sacrificing at the professional altar so that you can achieve the standard of success that someone else has told you is what you're supposed to achieve, you're never going to feel satisfied by your work. And the beauty of the kind of industry that you're in is that you have the ability to decide, this is what success looks like for me. And that includes the rest of my life outside of the number, the measurement, the accolades, or the recognition from other people. What do I want this business to look like? How much do I need to bring in order to have that? And how am I going to create space? And so one of the things to think about as we're talking about all this, you know, we had this big boom in the real estate industry just, you know, within the last couple of years before the interest rates went up. And those are fantastic times to be very aware of the fact that that's not going to last, not in a negative or pessimistic way, but in a realistic way. It's a cycle. How can you set yourself up during those periods to feel secure and stable and be able to take the downtime that you know is going to come eventually, whether it's the natural cycle, like at the end of the year, or for some other reason, like rates are going up, where you'll feel okay and know, like, you know, now I'm really going to take advantage of and do a bunch of things that I've been putting off or that I know are important for me, but I was trying to capitalize on what was happening. Right. So you've got to decide what success looks like for you. And if you're feeling like you're in a pressure cooker all the time and that it's never enough and that no matter how much money you make, you still feel dissatisfied, that tells me that your paradigm of what success means to you is off, because there's no magic wand. Just because you hit a certain number in your head that you think you need to hit, that means something, like you've proven how good you are, unless you are super clear on what you want that to feel like or what else that gives you, right? Because the whole point of money is it's a tool to do other things with. Take trips, have things, buy stuff, do stuff for your family. You've got to be really, really tapped into that and to see your personal experience along that path as important as your professional success. And if anything there is misaligned, no matter how much money you make, you will be a miserable human being.
It's interesting because you talked about it so much there, but it's like, I almost would challenge everybody to say, you know, take some time and figure out what your definition of success is, right?
Yep.
Not what other people determine as success. Like we do it here, right? Like we have an awards trip and we recognize certain producers every single year based off of criteria and based off a category, but we don't take everybody.
Right.
Does that mean the people that don't go aren't successful?
Right.
I mean, they're great contributors. I mean, every single one of them from top to bottom, they're great contributors. They do a lot for the company. Just because they didn't make the awards trip doesn't mean that they're not successful at their job.
I think this is a perfect example. So if there's anybody who's listening, who's thinking like, hey, I've never made the awards trip and that's just like a goal of mine, I really want to get there, which means I have to make X number of dollars, right? I want you to ask yourself why you want it. And the answer better be good, right? It can't just be because if I get there, then I have the recognition and I've proven that I can be that person, because that is not a good reason. That's how you end up pursuing and doing things that don't actually end up serving you. I remember working with an amazing agent who had hit a huge number in commissions and wanted to increase it. But the reason we were talking in the coaching capacity was because the rest of his life had kind of gone to hell during that year when he was trying to really hit this really big number. And he was saying, like, I want to focus on all these other things, but at the same time was setting a larger number, a larger goal for himself. And so I asked, you know, why do you want to do that? Well, I mean, that's what you do. I hit this number last year, and so I have to make it a bigger number this year. And so I said, but what was it like for you to hit the smaller number last year? well, it was terrible and my health is bad and I drank too much and I didn't sleep enough and now my relationship is X, Y, and Z. And I'm like, okay, well, then what is trying to hit a bigger number? What impact is that going to have on everything that you just said? You cannot be single-minded in the pursuit of professional success by someone else's measure that does not take into consideration what you need as a human being on a personal level. When you're a type A high achieving type of personality, which is those are my people, that's me, those are the people that I address. It's really easy to have very, very high standards for your professional success and very low expectations for what that does to you in the process. That needs to change. Like you said, that's where the redefinition of success becomes vital.
So I know we talked about another topic, right? And you kind of mentioned it. So I love the example of, if you think about the pandemic years in this industry, right? Those were 4 trillion plus markets, unheard of, right? Anything over 2 trillion is considered a really good environment, a good market, right? And like when you were in that mode as an originator, owner of a company, it was easy to not worry about the future.
Right.
Because you're in the moment, you were busier than you've ever been, you're writing more loans than you've ever written, you're helping people. I mean, refinances were falling off of trees during the pandemic, right? But wouldn't that have been a good time to sit back and pause and say, hey, this run's not going to happen forever, right? As you frame it, as the downturns, how can you be more strategic? How can you take advantage of, I think, what you call rhythms to like kind of rest, reset, and plan, and then kind of recharge to get away from the stress, right? Because the analogy you just made for the real estate agent, I mean, I think a lot of people in this industry can look themselves in the mirror and say, my health's gone to hell, my relationship's not good, my kids never see me, I'm stressed beyond belief, like I do nothing for myself, like outside of just 98% of what I do every single day is about work and my professional career, and everything's over here. I'd love to talk about that for a little bit.
Yeah, it's a real problem. It really is a problem. And it's a lot of it comes from whenever you are essentially working for yourself, right? Which is what we're talking about here. There's always this fear that you're leaving something on the table somehow, that there's an opportunity to make money, or, if you're not out there and you're not putting yourself through the ringer in order to always be visible and always be getting the deals, that you're missing out on something, that you're leaving money on the table, that you can't rest, because if you rest, then everything's going to go sideways and you're going to be in this terrible place. And that really comes from basically what's called a scarcity mindset, right? Which is where you're so focused on loss and what you're missing out on, instead of knowing that, you know what, if the rest of your life is going really well and you're taking good care of yourself and you're able to say no to people that are going to be like the most miserable clients you've ever worked with because it's not worth the energy that it takes, and they're taking up so much space in your life that you could potentially be working with like 3 other people at the same time, learning to set the boundaries around what you're willing to put yourself through is only going to improve your business. And we have this very broken, I'll get on my capitalism soapbox for just a minute, where, capitalism has this amazing, there's great things about it. You can go out there and decide, I want to work this hard and make this much money, and that's what I'm going to do. The problem though is that everything becomes about that pursuit. And so a lot of our conditioning is around, well, the harder you work, the more rewarded you will be. The harder you work, the more money you will make. The more you hustle and grind, the more you're going to see those outcomes. And it's really a way of keeping people in that mode so that the people who make money off of your effort can continue to make money off of your effort. Because what I have seen time and time again is when people actually start setting boundaries and saying no and taking time for themselves and not driving around like a car with its gas light on all the time, actually taking the time to take a break and fill up all the way, their businesses only improve. It only improves. There is a bad, I don't know what you want to call it, a myth, but basically this idea that you have to grind yourself into dust in order to have success is something that we've got to move past. There's a lot of reasons why it exists. And a lot of that conditioning is because it makes other people money when you work really hard. It's really not about you and your experience and what your personal business is doing. So being willing to test that out maybe by the next time that someone comes to you with a really difficult loan and you know it's going to be more trouble than it's worth, and it's, what if you say no? What if you just say no and see what else comes in to take its place? And doing it again, like, it's really important that you not go out and try to burn everything down and try to change everything all at once, because that won't work. It just won't work, right?
Right.
You have to be incremental and strategic. So pick these little places where you're like, well, normally I, spend way too much time with people that drain all my energy, and I'm just going to say no the next time that comes up. Just that one thing. Because then what happens is the next time something like that comes up, you've already done it once. You already have that comfort level with it. You probably have some benefits that you realize from that. It becomes easier to do it the next time. And the next time you might even move into saying no or setting a boundary with something that's a little bit bigger than the last time. This is all very incremental work. You can make drastic improvements to your life by doing these very small breadcrumb approach types of shifts.
It's interesting. I think one of the things you mentioned is key, right? And I think you would say the same thing, because that's why you kind of went down that path, is you can't just radically try to change everything overnight.
No.
That's not going to work.
No, it's not going to work.
To your point, you need to figure out, like, if you know this activity is draining, right, and nothing comes of it, then why are you doing it?
Yes.
And I mean, people, I think they roll their eyes when people talk about work-life balance, right? But I just take everything out and call it balance, right? At the end of the day, like you mentioned earlier, I mean, if it's all just drive and 99% of what your existence is related to what you do and how you function for yourself or other people, I'm not so sure that drives to success. That might drive people into an early grave in some instances versus driving people to success.
And sometimes those two things are really linked. I mean, there's a reason why we see successful people who have like heart attacks and other health events, at earlier ages than we would expect, because there's a lot of stress there. And you may think, well, if you're always kicking the can down the road and thinking, well, once I've made it to this level, then I'll relax, or then I'll take a break. That's a false promise. That's a way of rationalizing the approach that you're taking, because the reality is that kind of conditional thinking, putting conditions on when you're going to prioritize something, is giving you that false sense of really being willing to make a shift, when the reality is you're delaying it, and you're delaying it, and you're going to continue to delay it, because the reality is that the conditions will never be perfect for any change that you want to make, ever. So waiting for the right time or waiting until something's done, like, none of that. If you have a tendency to do that, it's something to look at, because I bet you'll see, if you look at your own tendencies to do that, how something that's really, really important to you, you have continued to put off because the timing's not right. Well, the timing's never going to be right. The time is whenever it needs to be prioritized. And the reality is that we're pretty good as human beings who are success oriented or achievement oriented at putting personal priorities on the back burner. And that is not a recipe for success that's going to lead you to a good place. It might be a version of success that feels really hollow once you get there.
Interesting. Hey, one other thing I wanted to talk about, because I know we talked about it kind of leading up to our session, is this concept of mindset hacks, right? I found that intriguing to me. And like, I guess in your mind, what is that, and how can you recognize that to shift the perspective, as you would call it, right? To create a different version or more stability from a standpoint of understanding what's going on.
Yeah. So we talked about all of them. So I'll just kind of put them all, we'll put them in a nice, neat little list.
Yeah.
You can't be on autopilot, whatever you're doing every single day without thinking, and the emotions are crap, and it's a bad day every day, and it's stress from morning till night. The autopilot has to end. So the first thing you have to do is be conscious, like we talked about. So you got to be awake. You got to know what's happening in your head. You got to know what that voice is saying. You've got to tune into how you feel. The phone rings, it's that person's number. You immediately feel tense. There's a problem there, right? Just making note of all the little ways that the emotions that we don't want to be feeling all the time are showing up. And a really good way to get into the habit of doing that is for 2 days, from the moment that your alarm goes off in the morning until you go to bed at night. Every hour or so, check in with yourself. and set the intention, I'm going to be conscious. What's the first set of thoughts and feelings that come into your head when you wake up in the morning? Where does the stress begin? Where does the fretting begin? Do you check your email? Is it a meeting with a person? Is it worrying about a contract? Keeping track of all these little ways and writing down how you feel. And you have to be specific. It can't be like, this really sucks or it feels really bad. You have to use real words. Use your big girl language, big boy language, and be like, I'm anxious, I'm irritated, I'm scared. Use real words and check in every so often during the day and review what's happened and make note of it. Or use your voice memo thing on your phone and just record it if you don't want to sit down and write it down. If you do that for a couple of days, you naturally become more inclined to be conscious. So you have to be awake. You've got to turn off autopilot, be present inside your own mind. And then that's when you fact check. Okay, that voice inside your head says it's all going to hell. Is it though? And have a conversation inside your own mind, like a crazy person. Do it out loud. It doesn't matter. You need to engage with that part of you that's been on autopilot and running in the background all the time and creating and doubling down on the things that really aren't working for you. So you fact check that, and then you do the pattern interruption, which is what we talked about. If you have a tendency to fret about the same thing over and over again, like, I don't know where my next client's coming from, that's where you do that very subtle shift and say, it'll be cool to see where my next client's coming from. Something very subtle. You're worried that everything's going to hell in a handbasket. Oh my gosh, it's all going sideways. It's terrible times. You know what? This happens on a regular basis. It's going to correct itself. We'll just have to be patient. Pattern interruptions. Okay. So if you're present with what's happening in your mind and you can fact check yourself when you're talking nonsense that's based on fear and scarcity, and then interrupt that thought or respond to that thought with something that neutralizes it, that is the most important set of things that you can do for yourself until you build that muscle memory and resilience around that becoming more second nature to you.
Well, and gang, as you're watching this, right, you see this pop up down below. Obviously, getting in touch for contact with Maki, you can do that via her LinkedIn. And I know we've been running that throughout the session. Maggie, sorry, a couple questions. A couple people wrote, one of them was specifically, how do I know if this is kind of right for me? Right? Like, I think people sometimes are skeptical on the whole coaching just in general, but from everything that you've done and the individuals you've worked with, what would you say would be like, if I'm looking in the mirror, is this right for me? What would you to pursue for that example? Right? What would you say to that?
I think the best way to know it is that this is something that you have found challenging for a long time, right? It's maybe something where you have been aware, like, something's just not right. I don't really know how to fix it. Maybe you've been reading books or listening to podcasts and trying to find those answers. And you feel like you have a decent awareness, maybe even of like, I know what I'm doing, but I don't know actually how to shift it. So if it's persistent and you really haven't found a way to move forward and it's been hanging around, I think that's when it's kind of a good clue. Like, I might need some help with this because I'm not really getting to a place where I can shift it, even though I'm aware that there's a problem.
Makes sense. What if, just a couple comments. What if you're somebody that, if you're being honest with yourself and you're looking at this and you feel like there's multiple areas in your life, right? It's not just business, but then, when you look at your professional, you kind of feel like maybe you're in that, everything we just described about, right? You're in that zone. But then when you're honest with each other, you look at your personal side, it's just as chaotic, right? Where do you start, I guess, is kind of the consensus of a theme of a question.
Yeah. So the thing is, the good news is it's all one thing. So the way that we compartmentalize things in our mind is false. Whatever's happening in our life is happening in our life. And it's the same tendencies or energies that are showing up in multiple places. So they look a little bit different. So the really good news is you do what we talked about, which is you focus on one thing that is really out of whack first, that's really asking for your attention, and you work on that. And then organically you will see, okay, I think it's time to work on this now, because the way life is really interesting. Once people start this process, there's generally things that will come up and ask for attention in a very organic manner. And you are building that ability to be very aware of what's being shown to you and what needs to shift as you work through things kind of one at a time. And what looks like 100 different things to us, I'll tell you what, it's usually the same 3 to 5 tendencies happening across the board. And so it's actually much more condensed than most people think it is. But it's a matter of being able to connect those dots and see like where all the similarities are kind of intersecting with one another.
Sure, for sure. Hey, I think I would throw this out there and just get your answer on this, right?
Mm-hmm.
For anybody that's looking at this. So in our world, right, there are a lot of like mortgage coaches, productivity,
Mm-hmm.
success coaches type of thing. I kind of feel like this is a different path or a different mindset of what we're talking about here. So I would love for you just to share with everybody kind of why you like the difference between what we're talking about now and maybe those type of coaching
Yeah.
or counseling sessions.
Yeah, it's a great question. So you were talking earlier about how you would do these things where you would sit in a room together and you'd make a bunch of phone calls and you guys would, keep track of your nose, things like, the productivity type of coaching. And productivity coaching and any kind of coaching that's typically offered by the industry is not bad or wrong. You should always try those things on to see if they work for you. And if they work for you, that's great. And if they don't work for you, that's okay. Like move on to other approaches. But they're very focused on a measurable result, right? What we're talking about is doing the work to get you to the result that's intangible, which is the fulfillment, a sense of peace and calm, a sense of being able to weather the storm, of not having to ride an emotional roller coaster. Those are not outcome oriented from the traditional, tangible, measurable sense that most coaching that is focused on success is. This is more about you already know how to do all the tangible stuff, but a lot of that tangible stuff is what's getting you into trouble on the intangible side of not prioritizing the other things that really matter to you appropriately. So it's a completely different intention, but one that really can bring both sides together so that you feel very well prepared to pursue what's going to work for you and to have that definition of success be the one that's for you by using the tools that you want to take from the productivity world and the ones that are going to keep you grounded in what's aligned to you on this side of the equation.
Makes sense. And again, guys, you can follow her and connect with her on her LinkedIn that we've been running on that banner down below. I guess, Maki, anything kind of in closing you want to wrap up with?
Yeah. So you mentioned my book, and I really do. The entire book is about what we're talking about. So if you are interested and you think, I might want to spend some time on this, I was really deliberate in making sure that the end of every single chapter has actual homework for you to do. So it's not like you're going to bust through it and read it all and be done. It's read it and do the work. Read it and do the work. It really is oriented to what we're talking about today. So it's a resource that's available to you if that's, something that you're kind of curious, not sure if it's for you. Yeah. I would suggest reading it.
Yeah, and again, that's Musings of a High Achiever.
That's the podcast. The book is the High Achievers Guide.
Sorry. Oh, the High Achievers Guide. You're right. Yeah. The High Achievers Guide. There you go. Well, hey, listen to the podcast too.
That too. I mean, that's basically me doing a version of this where I pick a topic that I know is important for high achieving people and I just talk about it.
Got it. Well, hey, Maggie, I certainly appreciate you jumping on board today with us. I'm glad that Christine was able to connect us and you were able to do this for us today. I certainly appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. I hope it was valuable and I hope you feel better.
Thanks. We're working on it. Well, hey, gang, certainly appreciate you. Again, as always, whether you watched it live or you're seeing the replay of this, again, it's about bringing value, right? And added value. Today's session, to me, extremely timely, especially in regards to everything that we're going through, right? Like we talked about. And look, the balance in your life between your profession and your personal and your mental wellness, they've never been probably more important than they are right now, quite honestly. And again, not to say that they've never been important because they always have been. But when you frame it in the context of everything that we're being challenged with on our professional side, I mean, taking that time, finding the calm, figuring out what is real versus what is perception, and then how do you adjust moving forward. I think Maki gave us a lot of really good information and tips to take away. But again, the book is called The High Achiever's Guide. Her podcast is The Musings of a High Achiever. And we certainly appreciate her coming on board and sharing some thoughts with us today. And then our next session in November, obviously, Veterans Day is coming up in November. Wanted to try to do something around Veterans Day. So we've asked Christopher Griffith of Vetted VA to come on the 16th at 2 p.m. And again, I've gotten a chance to know him over many years now at multiple companies, and is a champion for all things veterans, and really looking forward to having him on. And again, just having a free conversation around, maybe some of the myths, maybe some of the things people don't know, maybe some of the things you should be taking into consideration when looking at, VA loans for our veterans. And always interested to hear what he has to say and the wisdom that he brings to that whole subject, because there are a lot of people that are passionate about it, and he is certainly one of the ones I would put at the very top of that list as far as making sure that from a veteran's perspective, they continue to be forefront in the community, in the mortgage industry, and I'm really looking forward to having him on. So again, thanks again for joining. As always, we certainly appreciate it. We appreciate you. We appreciate the partnership. We know you have choices, so we always appreciate that you think of Flagstar and being a partner of ours. Have a good one, and we will talk to you in November.